Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for being here. Perhaps I could set the scene, Minister, with a question to you, because it does involve an opinion. Is the Australian government concerned that China now owns 10 times the amount of Australian land that it did this time last year, representing 25% of all foreign-owned land in Australia?
I don't know whether that's a relevant question for this portfolio.
Okay, I'll take that as an answer. My question's now to the Department. How many scientific bases have been built by the Chinese government within the boundaries of the Australian Antarctic Territory?
I'll get Charlton Clark to answer that.
Yep, Senator, I'm happy to leap into that. So there are currently 3 Chinese bases in the Australian Antarctic Territory, Zhongshan, Kunlun and Taishan. A 4th base is being built outside the Australian Antarctic Territory in the Ross Sea dependency on the Inexpressible Island.
Okay, thank you. What is the Australian government position on further Chinese bases being built within the Australian Antarctic Territory?
Senator, I can't answer on a policy basis, and we're not aware of any additional bases being considered at this stage beyond those that I've discussed.
Senator, what I will say is Australia is a strong advocate and supporter of the Antarctic Treaty System, and the Antarctic Treaty System is what governs what bases are built within Antarctica. And so from a perspective of the department, we continue to support the Antarctic Treaty System.
What are the conditions or obligations relevant in that to this question? Can you give us some understanding?
Yeah, Mr. Clark should be able to answer that.
Thanks, Senator. Charlton Clark, General Manager Strategies, Australian Antarctic Division. Just by way of context, the Antarctic Treaty System sets aside and preserves Antarctica as a place for peace and science, and that freedom of scientific inquiry allows countries to establish research facilities throughout the continent, and that's what the current state is at the moment, where we see bases established throughout the region, obviously established for scientific inquiry. The treaty system establishes a process by which any new proposal, large-scale infrastructure, such as a station, goes through an environmental assessment process where that proposal, if it triggers a certain level, would go to an annual Antarctic Treaty meeting. The Committee for Environmental Protection would consider a draft comprehensive environmental evaluation for the construction of that station. All countries are able to comment on the proposal, and in that proposal not only would it outline what are the environmental implications of the construction of the station, but also countries are asked to establish the scientific rationale and the support that station provides.
So let me check my understanding then. We don't make the decision, we have some input into a committee decision.
Ultimately, it's a decision for each nation whether to proceed with a station in Antarctica, just as it is for Australia, as it is for other countries. The proposal is commented on by other countries at the Antarctic Treaty meeting, and countries who are putting forward a proposal are obliged to respond to the issues raised by each of the countries who might make inquiries or make comments on the proposal.
But as to whether or not a base is built by any country in our territory or the territory we oversee, then that's not our decision, it's a committee decision as to whether or not it goes ahead.
Ultimately, it's a decision for the country proposing the construction of the research facility, taking into advice the input from all the other countries in the treaty.
So it's free for anyone to do it so long as they meet the advice or follow the advice of the other countries on the committee?
I wouldn't characterise it as countries are free to in those words, Senator. There's quite an established process for dealing with all of the requirements and assessment. It's not a simple, here's a proposal, make some comments and then we'll reflect on it. It's quite a deliberative process, but just as any other country and Australia would go through before they put in place any new infrastructure in Antarctica.
Thank you. Are military activities being undertaken by the Chinese on Chinese bases in the Australian Antarctic Territory?
Senator, we've got no evidence to suggest that that's the case. There has been reporting of dual-use technologies in Antarctica.
Sorry, what was that?
I said, Senator, there has been media reporting of the dual-use technologies that's sometimes described as being used in Antarctica. That's not uncommon, where facilities such as satellites are used for scientific purposes as ground to provide accurate information for scientific instrumentation. A number of programs in Antarctica are using that sort of technology.
Okay, so it's not being monitored as such by the Australian government?
The Australian Antarctic Division doesn't monitor those sorts of activities in Antarctica.
So what is planned, if anything, by Australia to monitor the Chinese bases?
Senator, we have a long-established collaboration with Chinese research colleagues where at an operational level, at a scientific level and a policy level, we're frequently undertaking exchanges of personnel, visiting each other's stations, collaborating in logistics support where Australian researchers would fly on Chinese aircraft and vice versa. So through that program, we have a long-established understanding of elements of the Chinese program. In addition to that, we frequently undertake visits to Chinese bases, and as has been discussed previously, at previous estimates, we have an inspection program that from time to time we conduct more formal inspections of other countries' operations in Antarctica, and we don't comment in advance of undertaking those inspections.
Is there any strategy, and perhaps my ignorance of the nature of the treaty may be an impediment here, but what is the strategy of Australia to ensure its claim to the Australian Antarctic Territory is not diminished by the activities of China or any other nation?
May I answer that, Tom? Yeah. So, Senator, it's Kim Ellis here. There are a series of pillars that actually support our maintenance and care of the Australian Antarctic Territory and the preservation of our long-standing claims of that, regardless of the fact that the treaty has put those claims aside during its operation. So we maintain 3 permanent bases in Antarctica, in the Australian Antarctic Territory, and use those for a rigorous regime of scientific research. We have a summer base at Wilkins Air Base that operates throughout the summer season. And the ongoing investment, driven through the 20-year Australian Antarctic Strategy and Action Plan, ensures that there's a continuous level of investment and activity in the Antarctic. And that is the best way for us to actually maintain a presence on site. That combined with the inspection regime that Mr. Charlton outlined, and that's a planned inspection regime that will put both Australian Antarctic Division staff and Foreign Affairs staff on the Antarctic, visiting areas within the Australian Antarctic Territory. And then the third leg of it is actually our presence and support for the Antarctic Treaty system. So we are a significant player, punching well above our national size in the Antarctic Treaty system. And that allows us to ensure that environmental standards are being met, that nations are complying with the rules and guidelines of the Australian Antarctic Treaty system, and that our influence in the Antarctic Treaty system is strong, rigorous and sustained.
Thank you. What is the expenditure on scientific projects within the Australian Antarctic Territory by Australia compared with that of China, if you've got some rough estimate or idea?
Senator, firstly, we don't have clarity on China's expenditure, so doing a comparison of Chinese science expenditure and ours would be difficult, if not impossible.
Okay. So we can take notice the level of investment this government has announced investments over the last 2 years into the Antarctic science, and we'll take that on notice and provide.
Thank you, Mr. Carr.
Mr. Howell, a lot of that's marine climate science too, isn't it?
Yes, there's a portion of that that's
You might
climate
want to
science.
look at that information too, Senator Roberts.
Sure, I'm sure the Chinese are.
Well,
Okay.
someone's got that.
Colleagues, thank you.